Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Ready to dive into some fascinating research with me today? We're going to be looking at some cutting-edge studies that link genetics to socioeconomic outcomes.
It's a really complex field,
It is.
but that's what makes it so interesting, right?
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that's so important to emphasize right off the bat is that this is not about saying your destiny is set in stone because of your genes.
Absolutely not.
It's much more nuanced than that. It's about understanding those subtle ways that our genes might interact with our environment to influence our paths in life.
It's about teasing out that interplay of nature and nurture, not saying that one is the be-all and end-all.
Exactly. And we've got some really interesting sources to dig into today. We've got that landmark study that was published in Psychological Science called The Genetics of Success. We've also got some analyses on the genetics of economic mobility. There's a Harvard Business Review article we're going to be looking at, and even research from Stanford's Graduate School of Business about, get this, genes and financial decision-making.
It's going to be a wild ride.
It is. Buckle up, because this is where things get really, really interesting.
Our goal today is to really sift through all of that research and give you the key takeaways.
Yes.
Without getting too bogged down in all the technical jargon.
For sure.
And hopefully you'll walk away with a few aha moments along the way.
Let's start with a real-life example. The Determinism study. Have you ever heard of this?
Absolutely. The Genetics study is like the gold standard.
Yeah, okay.
For this kind of research. It's one of the most comprehensive longitudinal studies ever done.
Wow.
They followed over 1,000 individuals in New Zealand for over 4 decades. Imagine the data. They captured everything from their childhood development to what these folks were like in adulthood.
That is incredible. So that's a lot of information to draw
A
from.
goldmine, really.
Okay, so this Junnin study, it's where a lot of the research we'll be talking about stems from.
Yeah.
And they use this thing called a polygenic score.
Right.
I know that might sound kind of intimidating, but it's actually pretty straightforward once you break it down.
It is.
So how would you explain a polygenic score to someone who's never heard of it before?
Okay, so imagine it's like a talent scout score, but for your likelihood of, say, achieving higher education based on your DNA.
Oh.
It's not about one single gene, though.
Okay.
It's based on tons of genetic markers and gives you a sense of someone's kind of predisposition toward certain educational outcomes.
So it's not like there's one single gene that determines whether you are going to, get a PhD.
Not at all.
What?
It's about the combined effect of, like, think of it as many genes all working together.
Like a team.
Exactly. Like a team. And what's fascinating is that this score, this polygenic score, it predicted more than just academic achievements. The researchers found some really interesting correlations with outcomes later in life, things that went way beyond the classroom.
Well, now you've got me on the edge of my seat. What else did they find?
So they found that individuals with higher polygenic scores from the Dindin study, they weren't just like bookworms.
Right.
They were also more geographically mobile,
Oh, interesting.
meaning they were more likely to move to chase opportunity.
So we're talking about people who are willing to relocate to further their prospects.
Exactly. Pack their bags and go.
Did that ambition actually translate into career success, though?
It did. They found that those with the higher scores were more likely to end up in more prestigious jobs, the ones with, the higher incomes.
Of course.
And they tended to be more financially secure overall. More assets, fewer money problems.
Interesting. Now, what about social mobility? Because that's a big part of the conversation, right?
Huge.
Did the research show that genes could play a role in someone from a disadvantaged background, kind of climbing the ladder, so to speak?
Yeah, and that's where it gets even more interesting. They specifically looked at that, and what they found was that even kids from less privileged families, if they had higher polygenic scores, they tended to achieve more than their peers.
Wow.
So it suggests that genes might play a part in social mobility, but again, it's not the whole story, right?
Right. Environment obviously matters too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that age-old nature versus nurture debate.
Exactly.
And this research really emphasizes that genes don't operate in a vacuum.
Right.
Our environment, our experiences, they play a massive role.
Of course.
And the Dunedin study actually uncovered some really cool connections between this polygenic score and certain psychological traits.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, for example, they found that kids with higher scores tended to develop language skills earlier.
Oh, interesting.
Things like talking and reading at a younger age.
So if you connect those dots, it makes you wonder if early intervention could make a big difference.
Exactly.
Like if we have robust reading programs for young children, could that have a long-term impact?
That's exactly the kind of question this research raises. Understanding these links could be so valuable for designing effective interventions,
Yeah.
especially during those crucial early years. And it wasn't just language skills. They also found that kids with higher scores showed faster cognitive development overall.
So they were hitting those developmental milestones quicker.
Basically, yeah, they were quicker learners.
Mhm.
Now, did they look at personality?
That's a great question. I'm curious about that too. Were there any personality traits that they found were linked to this polygenic score?
They did, actually.
Ah.
They found correlations with what we call non-cognitive skills, like self-control and interpersonal skills.
Oh, so it's not just about being academically gifted.
No, not at all.
It's also about having the discipline to actually pursue your goals.
Exactly. And the social skills to navigate the world effectively.
Right, right. So it's like a combination of factors.
It's multifaceted. It's
Yeah.
always more complicated than you think, isn't it?
It always is. I'm curious, did their research touch upon any other aspects of life, like relationships, for example?
It did, actually. This is
Yeah.
one of the things I found super fascinating. They found that people with higher polygenic scores also tended to choose partners who also had higher socioeconomic attainments.
Wait, really?
Yeah, isn't that wild?
That's so interesting. So you're saying even our romantic choices might be influenced by our genes in some way?
It's an area that needs more research, for sure. But it definitely makes you think.
It really does. Like, what's the thinking there? Do we gravitate towards partners who share similar interests because those interests might stem from our genetic predispositions?
That's one theory.
Or is it more about the social circles we move in, which are often influenced by socioeconomic factors, and maybe we're just more likely to meet partners within those circles?
Right, it could be a bit of both. It's hard to tease apart.
It makes you think about how certain advantages, if they are influenced by genetics, could be amplified across generations.
Absolutely.
Like if people with higher scores are more likely to partner up and then they have kids and those kids inherit those genes, it's like the compounding effect.
Exactly. It's a really interesting angle.
Yeah.
And it kind of brings us to the big question. Why does any of this matter?
Right. What's the so what for our listeners?
Exactly. We can't just drop all this mind-blowing research
Yeah.
and not talk about what it means for us as individuals
Exactly.
and for society as a whole.
It's about understanding the implications both on a personal level and a broader societal level.
Exactly. And I think the most crucial thing to remember here is that this research is absolutely not about genetic determinism.
We have to drive that point home.
We do, because our genes, they are not our destiny.
It's not about labeling people as like winners or losers based on their DNA.
Exactly. It's about understanding the interplay between our biology and our experiences.
Right. We still have agency.
Absolutely. We have the power to make choices, to learn, to grow, to carve our own path.
It's about empowering ourselves with knowledge, not boxing ourselves in with predetermined labels.
100%.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned a Stanford study earlier,
guess.
the one that looked at financial decision-making.
Right, right.
Did they find any direct links between our genes and how we handle money?
They did. This is so interesting. They found that people with certain gene combinations tended to display higher anxiety about financial risk.
Really?
Yeah, which led them to make different investment choices, often more conservative ones. So they might opt for safer investments, even if they yield lower returns, rather than taking bigger risks for potentially higher rewards.
Makes sense.
Right. It's like that classic risk-averse versus risk-taking personality trait.
Exactly.
And it's amazing to think that our genes might play a role in that.
It is. It's all connected.
It is. Now, the Pew report we mentioned earlier and some of the academic papers we looked at, they also delved into the potential policy implications of all this.
They did, and it's a whole other layer of complexity, right?
Right, because if our genes can influence our socioeconomic outcomes, even if it's just one piece of the puzzle,
Sure.
then shouldn't we consider that when we're creating social programs or economic policies?
Absolutely. One of the key questions is, could this knowledge help us design more effective social programs?
Right, like could we tailor interventions to individual needs based on these genetic predispositions?
Exactly. A more personalized approach, you could say.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Were there any specific suggestions that emerged from the research?
Well, there was this one study that looked at pension plans,
Okay.
and they found something pretty interesting. They found that pension plans seem to lessen the impact of genetic differences on wealth inequality.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. So what they're suggesting is that policies providing a safety net, like Social Security or guaranteed retirement income, those kinds of things, might help balance the scales a bit,
Interesting.
regardless of any genetic advantages.
So it's like ensuring a basic level of financial security can help level the playing field for everyone.
Exactly. It's about creating a more equitable society.
I like where this is going. Now, we've covered a lot of ground here, and this research is clearly super promising, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on where it goes from here. What are some of the big unanswered questions the scientists are still wrestling with?
Well, one area I think is really interesting is the study of outliers.
Outliers.
Yeah, these are the individuals who kind of like defy the expectations, based on their polygenic score. So, for example, someone with a high score who, for whatever reason, might face unexpected challenges in life.
So it's like they have the genetic predisposition for success, but something blocks them from achieving it.
Exactly. Or, on the flip side, someone with a lower score who somehow manages to overcome the odds.
Interesting. So what can we learn from those exceptions to the rule? What are the researchers saying about outliers?
Well, by studying those cases, we might uncover other factors that are playing a role that we haven't fully accounted for yet.
Okay.
Things beyond just the polygenic score that contribute to someone's overall success or lack thereof.
So like environmental influences, maybe? Or unique life experiences?
Exactly. It could be any number of things. It could even be other genetic components that we just haven't identified yet.
Right, because our understanding of genetics is still evolving.
Oh, absolutely. We're constantly making new discoveries.
So it's about recognizing the limitations of our current knowledge and continuing to explore and ask questions.
Exactly. We've only just scratched the surface here.
It really feels that way. This whole field of research is just so fascinating to me.
It is, and it really highlights the interconnectedness of everything. Our genes, our environment, our choices, it's all intertwined.
It is. It's like this intricate web of factors that shape who we are and what we become.
Precisely.
Well, if our listeners are as intrigued by all of this as I am, and they're eager to kind of dive in and explore further, where would you direct them? What are some key areas they could look into?
Well, if you're interested in this whole idea of how our genes and our socioeconomic outcomes are connected, I would definitely recommend checking out the research coming out of the Dunedin study,
Okay.
because they're really leading the charge in this area.
Okay.
And then more broadly, the field of sociogenomics as a whole is just exploding right now.
Sociogenomics.
Yeah. It's the study of how our genes interact with our social environment to shape our lives.
I'm adding that to my list. I'm going to have to do a deep dive on that for sure.
You should. There are some mind-blowing discoveries happening all the time. It's a really exciting field to be following.
It sounds like it. Well, this has been an incredible journey today. From uncovering those secrets of the Dunedin study to grappling with all the complexities of these findings.
It has been fascinating.
Yeah.
And more than a little mind-bending.
Well, a little bit,
Yeah.
but in a good way. It really
Mhm.
makes you think differently about things. I think the biggest takeaway here is that while our genes are definitely part of our story,
Sure.
they're not the whole story.
Exactly.
We have the power to make choices, to learn, to grow, to carve our own paths.
We have agency.
Yes. And understanding this interplay of nature and nurture can really empower us to make more informed decisions, create new possibilities, and ultimately build a brighter future for ourselves and for generations to come. So thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating topic with you.
The pleasure was all mine.